I'm very happy to say that you all seem to like these question and answer videos as much as I do, so here we are, back with a third installment. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question. If you did submit one but it doesn't get answered here, the timing was probably off and it should show up the next time we do this. And if you have any questions you'd like to submit for next time, leave them in the comment section of this video. But for now, let's get right to it. Cosmic Caster asks, what do you hope to see for the Blue Lanterns and Star Sapphires with the new beacon? Do you think St. Walker would be introduced to the United Planets? Do you think there will be conflict with the old and new Star Sapphires? So right now, there are about 600 lanterns gathered on Oa. Out of that 600, some are green, some are blue, and some are sapphires. We don't know how that actually divides up yet, but there's a chance it could be pretty equal, with each corps having around 200 members, which is what I'm kind of hoping for, since it would level the playing field for all three, and force them to interact with each other and the rest of the universe in new ways. Their current setup is basically tailor-made for a level of cooperation that these three factions have never experienced. Their numbers may all be the same, they all have the same power source on the same homeworld, and the fact that 100% of them started out as Green Lanterns means that they already have the relationships to make working together easy. Then there's the fact that this could be the first time in their entire existence that the Blue Lantern Corps is truly in a position to thrive, since they might have more members than ever before, and can now be protected by two other corps who share their homeworld. The Blue Lantern Corps being the same size as the Green Lantern Corps could be a game changer for both of them. On top of that, by getting rid of the Zamarons and populating the Star Sapphires entirely with former Green Lanterns, that should theoretically erase any reason for those corps to fight with each other, while also potentially installing some solid new leadership. Why was Princess Iolande made into a Star Sapphire? I think it's because this is traditionally a matriarchal group, and Iolande is literal royalty. And as you alluded to, there are bound to be surviving members of both of these corps out there who I imagine will have strong opinions about all of this. I think St. Walker will be happy, especially if there really are 200 Blue Lanterns now. And yeah, he would make a good ambassador to the United Planets. Though I wonder how welcome he would be among this new Blue Lantern Corps, since literally everyone else is a former Green Lantern, and none of them were selected the way he was. This is a new version of the Blue Lantern Corps, and there might be friction with Walker, since he represents the way things used to be. Carol could be in the same boat, but honestly I think she'd be thrilled to see the Star Sapphires under new management. The question is, who's going to be calling the shots, and what happens when Carol tries to throw her weight around? I could see Hal going to Earth and bringing Carol to Oa to try and help the new Sapphires get on their feet, maybe help train them, and then it becomes a shouting match between her and Iolande over who knows best when it comes to the direction the Corps should take. Abdullah Farah asks, did the other human or humanoid Green Lanterns begin to pop up after the Lantern Corps got wiped out or before, like the Lanterns after Hal? So the Green Lantern Corps has been wiped out twice, and by wiped out, I mean that someone with an agenda destroyed or stole the central battery, suddenly leaving the entire Green Lantern Corps depowered, stranded, or dead, with just one or two lanterns still having rings that work. The first time this happened was in Green Lantern number 50 in 1994, and the second time it happened was in Green Lantern number 3 in 2021. As for when the different Green Lanterns started showing up in relation to those dates, Hal Jordan got his ring in 1959, Guy Gardner was in 1968, John Stewart was 1972, and Kyle Rayner was 1994 in the exact same issue the Corps was wiped out. Then Simon Baz came in 2012, Jessica Cruz became a Green Lantern in 2018, and Sojourner Moline got her ring in 2020. And all of this sits in the greater context of the Green Lantern Corps having been around for over 3 billion years, which means there have been billions upon billions upon billions of Green Lanterns long before the human race ever even existed. So anytime there's a Green Lantern Corps, it's filled with aliens of all shapes and sizes. Zachary Parkerson wants to know, whatever happened to Malvolio destroying Hal's ring from Abin Sur? Not that that has anything to do with this run, I'm just happy Hal doesn't have that silly ring made from his own willpower. So Lord Malvolio was a villain from Action Comics Weekly number 632 through 635 in 1988. The short version is that he was the son of a Green Lantern and killed his dad to steal his ring. So the Guardians banished Malvolio to this pocket of space he could never escape from. But when Hal stumbles across him, Malvolio realizes that he can break free with Hal's help. The two of them fight each other, Hal is completely out of his league, and Malvolio even destroys Hal's ring. Hal does eventually win, but he's stranded without a ring, so he takes Malvolio's. And as Hal flies away, Lord Malvolio just smiles, because this was all part of his plan to get revenge on the Guardians for sealing him away. And then in 1994, Emerald Twilight happened, and Hal snapped, killing Green Lanterns and Guardians and blowing up the Central Battery. And a lot of fans latched on to this Lord Malvolio story as a possible explanation for Hal's behavior, because we never saw Hal get a new ring after leaving Malvolio behind, and killing the Guardians was one of Malvolio's goals all along, so maybe there was something about that ring that influenced Hal in some way. But that was all just fan speculation, and what really happened is plans changed, creative teams changed, and Lord Malvolio was forgotten. There's always the potential for this character and storyline to come back and pay off in some way down the line, but as of right now, it never has. Zachary Parkerson also says, I have a silly fanboy question. Is it ever explained how Mogo directed the rings to the new recruits? I ask because presumably rings went out before Mogo was recruited and continued to do so when he was briefly dead. Plus, how do the rings of other Corps find their way without a Mogo equivalent? It's always been a curiosity of mine, despite ultimately being a silly and unnecessary question. So it's funny, because inserting Mogo into the whole process was supposed to be the explanation for how the rings find their recruits, and they never actually bothered to explain how Mogo does that. Before this, back in the Silver Age, it was more common for a Lantern or Guardian to recruit you in person and hand you a ring. But now they really lean into the fact that the rings have advanced AI driving them, and can travel across space searching for a specific kind of target. That's why I think most of the other Corps do, though that doesn't mean nobody is directing those rings. The philosophy and structure of a Lantern Corps depends heavily on the beliefs and intentions of the person who starts it. And in the case of both the Star Sapphires and the Red Lanterns, we've seen that how those rings work and who they seek out is based on the ideology of their leaders. So the rings are following an algorithm, and it's just a matter of who programmed that algorithm and what they designed it to look for. The Blue Lanterns actually don't automate any of the process. Ganthet and Sade chose St. Walker as the first Blue Lantern, then St. Walker chose Brother Worth as the second, then Worth chose the third, and so on. We've seen Ring AI choose Blue Lanterns a few times, but it's always been during extreme situations, like Blackest Night or when Hal's Blue Ring finally rejected him and flew off into space, never to be seen again. And now that I think about it, after Simon was recruited, there was a scene in the White House where the president was being briefed about a suspected terrorist having obtained a Green Lantern ring, and there was some conjecture about the rings supposedly having some sort of moral standard for who they selected. Maybe that's Mogo's role. Maybe the algorithm of the Ring AI identifies potential candidates, and then Mogo's best judgment is how one is picked. Kieran Ben Clark wants to know, should Carol Ferris or Yura Sinral get their own miniseries or ongoing, or a new character altogether? The fact that Carol Ferris and the Star Sapphire has been a part of Green Lantern since the beginning of the Silver Age without ever getting a lead role in a book is absolutely ridiculous to me, especially since that corner of the Green Lantern universe has been slowly accumulating everything you need to tell a really compelling long-form story about a decently large cast. And I think I might go in depth on this at a later time, because I have a lot of thoughts about what could be done with a Star Sapphire book, and laying it all out here would easily double the length of this video. But the answer is that yes, Carol and the other Star Sapphires could easily support their own book, and it could be one of the best ongoing series at DC if they approached it correctly. Robert Halishef asks, why didn't Kyle use the life equation to alter his own physiology? Kyle barely knew what he was doing when he had the life equation. Most of the times he did use it, he was just acting on instinct, and he didn't even realize that he had access to the equation at all. And by the time Kyle figured it all out, he realized it was too much power for any one person to have, so he got rid of it. Monty2814 asks, What do you think of the GL teases surrounding the Arrowverse and John Diggle? Do you think we will ever see an Arrowverse GL? I'm not a fan of making Diggle a Green Lantern, honestly. Of course I want to see a live-action Green Lantern in that world, but they don't need to figure out a way to make an existing character into a Green Lantern. And they absolutely do not need to retcon John Diggle into being John Stewart or something. I like Diggle. I like him as his own thing, as his own character. He doesn't need to become something else or be merged with another concept. If they want to introduce a Green Lantern into this universe, then they should treat it as a brand new character and cast someone new to play it, and just let Diggle be Diggle. The next batch of questions is from Ken Liston, who asks, do you prefer all of the lanterns wearing the same uniform or different designs? Personally, I prefer the latter, as the uniform should reflect the lantern's personality and style. Unique designs, 100%. It's a great way for these characters to express themselves, and if a character does decide to use the default costume, that becomes a choice that tells us something about the character and how they view their job as a lantern. But in general, it's a great way to make the Corps feel like a big group of individuals united for a common cause. What are your 5 favorite Green Lantern uniforms/costumes? This isn't restricted to the human lanterns. Personally, my top 5 are New 52 Hal, Jim Lee's Kyle design, Kyle's classic Darryl Banks uniform, Joe Moline's costume, and Ty Pham's costume. I also like Lara's uniform from the comics and the animated movies. I think my favorite is actually Jon Stewart's modern costume. It's a slightly altered version of what he wore on the Justice League cartoon, and I like how minimalistic it is. I think it's a really solid design, and there's an efficiency to it that I think works for John's personality. The rest of my top 5 would probably be Alan's classic costume, Guy's, Kyle's, and Joe's. They're all really cool and unique, and represent entirely different design philosophies. With Kyle Rayner, something I liked about his development in the 2000s was that he kept changing his costume to match his hero's journey. Jim Lee's design reflected his growing connection to the League and his attempts to fit closer to the classic definition of a hero, while his Honor Guard uniform mirrored his loyalty and newfound friendship within the Corps, while still trying to keep parts of his classic design like the mask and the more unique logo. But after losing his White Lantern ring, he went back to his classic design. Do you prefer he stick with his iconic costume or keep changing his suits? Also, you probably answered this question already, but do you prefer Kyle as a Green Lantern or something else? I think him being a White Lantern was a great opportunity for him to stand on his own, but it did make him overpowered and isolated from his fellow Lanterns and heroes. You know, my favorite bit with the costumes was during Young Justice Sins of Youth, where the Justice League were all turned into kids and Kyle kept changing his costume in every single panel he appeared in. I don't think we saw him wear the same one twice, and I really liked that because even though it was done as a joke, it felt like the kind of thing Kyle would do. He's defined by his creativity, more so than any other Green Lantern, so I think Kyle should actually be cycling through different costumes all the time. Old ones, new ones, just have fun with it and be creative. And I think Kyle works best as a regular Green Lantern. Everything that makes this character special has nothing to do with him possessing unique powers. What if you could only have 3 Lantern Corps? This doesn't have to be restricted to the 7 main emotional spectrum cores, but it's up to you. Personally, my first choice is pretty standard with the GLC, the Sinestro Corps, and the Star Sapphires, since they are the foundation of the emotional spectrum in my opinion. I think there's a lot of potential in keeping Red, Green, and Sapphire, the 2 extreme ends of the emotional spectrum and the neutral center. I think a lot of people forget that love is just as powerful and all-consuming as rage, and it would be interesting to more deeply explore how they relate to each other. With DC introducing John Kent, Damian Wayne, Andy Curry, and Irie West, what if one of the Human Lanterns had to have a child? Who would you choose? I know there's technically Ty Pham and Kelly kinda, but still. Personally, I would want Kyle and Jade to have a kid, disregarding how their relationship ended, but I think it would be interesting if they introduced Guy's son. Guy kinda had a baby already. Near the end of the Red Lanterns book, Guy is traveling around the world, cleaning up the aftermath of a massive battle against Atrocitus that left a ton of rage energy floating around. And he came across this baby who watched his parents die, because literally everyone in DC has to have the same origin as Batman. And the kid absorbed all of this rage energy and started manifesting this massive creature to act out on its behalf. Guy manages to stop the monster and absorb the power out of the baby, but nobody in town wanted anything to do with that kid anymore, not after seeing it create a giant creature of pure rage, so Guy took the kid with him. This only lasted for a few issues, and I don't remember what happened to this baby. I want to say the Guy's sister helped the kid get adopted, but I could be wrong. Either way, I think Guy is the natural choice to have children, especially since he grew up with an abusive father and would be driven to do better for his own kid. If you could have 3 versions of one of the Green Lanterns team up like Spider-Man No Way Home, who would you choose? My first choice is New 52, Earth 1, and New Frontier or Red Sun Hal's, possibly going against Parallax, Earth 3, and Injustice Hal. Give me Hal from Green Lantern the Animated Series, Hal from DC Superhero Girls, and Hal from Super Friends. Or just every version of Jessica. What if you could make a team of 5 to 7 Green Lanterns from different sectors? What would be the purpose of your team? This can include deceased lanterns, especially ones who haven't been replaced yet. My choices: Kyle Rayner, Saranac Natu, Hanu, Lara, Isamat Call, 2-6, and Stell. Since each character has different abilities and skills, I would imagine they would be a group of Honor Guard Lanterns tasked with helping Lanterns in the toughest battles and war zones. I think it would be cool to have a small team of hand-picked Lanterns who specialize in humanitarian aid. Saranac Natu would provide medical care, John Stewart could rebuild homes and infrastructure, Greet is Oa's cafeteria chef who specializes in recreating food from all over space, so he'd be able to keep everyone fed, Liesel Pawn, a sentient smallpox virus, could get in there and take care of any illness plaguing the population, and Hanu would be there just in case whoever caused all the carnage is still looking for a fight. If only 2 Lanterns could protect Earth/Sector 2814, and only one of them could be Hal or John, who would you choose? For me, it would be interesting to see how Hal and Kyle would share responsibilities on Earth and the rest of Sector 2814. I imagine Kyle would focus more on Earth with the Titans and the League, while Hal is more off-world, exploring other planets and sometimes coming to Earth in more serious situations. I think the 2 human Green Lanterns who would get the most out of being on Earth are Kyle and Simon. Kyle used to be the quintessential everyman hero, and now he hasn't even lived on Earth for who knows how many years. A story of him having to go back and attempt to figure out how to live like a normal person again could be really interesting, and also help ground the character in something relatable. Simon's family is a tremendous part of his life, and his relationship with the United States government is a huge part of his story, and none of that comes into play when Simon is in space for long stretches of time. How old are the different Lanterns in your eyes? How long has it been since Abin Sur died, and how many years has it been since Coast City exploded? I.e., what is the Green Lantern timeline for you? We know Alan is an adult in 1940, which means he had to have been born around 1920, so if time worked normally in comics, he'd be over 100, but that would be fine because he's sustained by one of the most powerful sources of magic in the universe. So maybe Alan's in his 70s or 80s, or make him 500. As long as the Starheart's in play, it's all the same. For everyone else, we're more or less on the same page. I think Hal, John, and Guy are all in their mid to late 40s, though Hal is probably a few years older than the 2 of them. And if those 3 are in their 40s, it makes the most sense for Kyle and Jade to be in their 30s, since Kyle and his friends used to look up to Hal Jordan's Green Lantern when he was a kid, and a 10-year difference could account for that. Jo definitely feels like she's in her 30s to me. Her whole vibe, I couldn't see her being any older or younger than that. We saw Simon as a kid during 9/11, so again, in real time, he'd likely be in his early 20s when he got his ring, which might put him at his mid to late 20s now, which I think pretty much works. He and Jessica feel like the youngest people in this group, and I definitely think she's in her late 20s. The tricky part is the timeline of events, because 6 months of a comic could cover years or a single day. But either way, something like the destruction of Coast City is always talked about like it happened a long time ago, but not as long as it's actually been in real life. I think it would be reasonable to say that Kyle's 10-year-long run as the only Green Lantern lasted about 4 years. It accounts for events in universe happening faster than real time, and still allows the characters to talk about Coast City as a tragedy that happened a long time ago. As for Abinster's death, I'm going to say that it happened when Hal was in his early to mid-20s, purely because his hair hadn't started to go white yet. And yes, I know, that white streak in his hair was retconned to be because of the fear parallax instilled in him, but it was originally just there to show he got older. And before you ask, no, I cannot justify any of this into a coherent timeline that would actually have room to fit everything, or line up with everything else in the DC universe that would also need to fit this timeline. And I'm not even going to try, because none of this was ever designed to line up like that. You just gotta go with your gut and fudge the numbers so you don't worry about it too much. If the Human Lanterns had to join different superhero teams, which teams would you have them join? For me, Hal is the Justice League, John is Justice League Elite, Guy is Justice League International, Kyle Titans, Simon Red Hood's Outlaws, Jess the Outsiders, and Joe the Suicide Squad. Alan, Jade, and Kelly would join the JSA, Infinity Inc., and Young Justice / Teen Titans, respectively. Hal can go to the Justice League, because that team's role in the overall DC universe plays to his strengths. Hal works best when you can just aim him at a big crisis and let him hit it as hard as he can. And that's basically the Justice League's job. DC is filled with other teams with different specialties, but the League is about jumping into the biggest, most impossible situations and somehow managing to pull through and win anyway. And that's kind of Hal's whole deal. For John, I think it might be fun to see him bring back a less popular team from the early 2000s, the Power Company. They were basically DC's version of Marvel's Heroes for Hire, a group of metahumans that treated superheroing as a business. It was all put together by a disgruntled former lawyer and didn't last very long. But I think it would be cool to see someone like John use his experience as both a superhero and a small business owner to revamp the Power Company into something more legitimate that can work long term. And that's right, I will never forget John's business, Shining Light Architecture, even if DC has. I imagine John could convince at least a few of the original members to come back, and then maybe round out the roster with one or two former Justice Leaguers, to give the team more of a solid foundation to build on. Firestorm was a member of the original Power Company for a while, so he'd be a good asset to have. And then maybe somebody more obscure who doesn't get many opportunities in the spotlight, like Gypsy from Justice League Detroit. For Guy, I think I'd just let him focus on the Green Lantern Corps. It means more to him than anything, and he's already proven himself. Nobody there questions his worth or looks down on him. On Earth, it's a constant uphill struggle for him to be taken seriously, and he's always seen as the other Green Lantern. And as much as I love Guy with the Justice League International, I think he belongs in space with the Corps. Kyle can go back to the Titans as long as an effort is made to really integrate him into that group. They should really get to know each other, maybe hang out together in their downtime. I'd like to see Kyle get to know Nightwing, because I can only think of like 2 times when they've ever even talked. I want to see every uncomfortable moment that comes from having to work alongside his ex-girlfriend Donna Troy. I want to see Impulse constantly doing everything he can to annoy Kyle, and Bart won't even be on the team. He'll just show up sometimes because he knows Kyle is there. Basically, the Titans have always been like a family, and even though Kyle's been a member of 2 different incarnations of the team, I've never really felt like he was part of that family, which is why I don't really think of him as being a good fit for the Titans, but I'd like that to change. Simon should join the Suicide Squad as a way of clearing his record with the US government. We'd get more of the kinds of stories the character was created to tell in the first place, and Simon could have some zany adventures with Harley Quinn, so everybody wins. I would keep Kelly in Young Justice, but shrink the roster. I think it's great that she found a massive group of friends, but they're completely lacking the kind of structure that Kelly needs to help get a handle on things. Plus, she never gets the spotlight, and a smaller core group would allow for more focus on everyone. Though I don't know who I'd cut, since the classic members are all great, and I love every single new member that joined in the Wonder Comics era. So maybe just stop having so many guest stars to inflate the character count. I'd like to see Jessica reform the Justice League Odyssey. By the end of that run, she'd formed a legitimate bond with Blackfire, Starfire's sister who's usually a villain, and Jessica was even getting along with Dexstar. So I'd put that trio back together and add a couple more space characters to fill out the roster, like Jem, son of Saturn, and maybe Hawkman. I'd put Jo on the Outsiders, because I genuinely think she'd get a kick out of being able to hang out with Black Lightning and Katana. Also, having a lantern on that team would finally give us an excuse to find out more about their teammate Halo, whose light-based powers were able to destroy Black Lantern rings during Blackest Night, which is something that's only supposed to be possible by combining willpower with the other aspects of the emotional spectrum. Alan belongs with the JSA. Let him be with his oldest friends as they teach the latest generation of young heroes what the job is all about. I think Jade should revive the Shadow Pact, a precursor to Justice League Dark that was a group of magical misfits drawn together by fate to deal with some pretty dire situations. I'd like to see Jade get more proactive and put together a team of magic users that'll come together the next time the Starheart lashes out. The Starheart is the sentient magical entity that gave Jade and her family their powers, and so far there have been 3 times when it's tried to evolve and enslave the world. Alan Scott stopped it the first time, but every time after that, the Starheart has made sure to subdue both Alan and Obsidian right away, even taking out both the Justice League and Justice Society, leaving Jade to deal with the situation herself. So it only makes sense that she'd want to set up an organized response for the next inevitable Starheart incident. And lastly, I would put Obsidian on the Justice League Dark. I think he'd fit nicely with the other supernatural oddballs that usually make up that team, and I bet they could use his connection to the Shadowlands in an interesting way that we haven't seen before. What do you think of the use of code names? I think the Lanterns with secret identities should use code names when they're on Earth. It's weird to me that Hal, Kyle, and I'm presuming Simon and Jess have to call each other by their first names or the same superhero identity. The use of codenames would not only alleviate the problem, but also make it easier for civilians and new readers to identify and acknowledge the different Lanterns. My thing is that Kyle would go by Ion or Torchbearer, Simon would be Warrior, Jess Limelight, and unless Alan still has a secret identity, Hal would be Sentinel or Spectre. I don't really think they need to do that, since the only time it would come up is when multiple Green Lanterns are on Earth together, which doesn't happen that much. That said, I could see this as something Jessica might want to try, although instead of reusing existing names, she'd try to come up with new ones that have something to do with the color green, and ultimately sound like really dumb Xbox gamer tags. So I think it would be fun to see them try to do it, but I do not think it would stick, especially with the older members of the group. This is a bit of a basic question, but do you prefer Alan Scott and Hal Jordan on the same Earth or separate ones? I prefer the same Earth as it helps establish a legacy for the Green Lantern role. Same Earth. Legacy is the best thing about DC Comics, and having one continuity with multiple generations that pass the torch to each other is perfect. My greatest hope is that someday they'll be brave enough to actually pass the torch from the current generation to the next one. And our last question for today is from Dark Odds, who says, I want to read up on Kyle Rayner more. What comics do you recommend to someone like me who's only got the basics on Kyle Rayner, such as he's an artist who became a Green Lantern, and would like to know more about him, like get a full analysis of his character depth, writing, and all that? I think your best bet is to read a bunch of Kyle's early stories to get a feel for what he was like when he first started out, and then jump around to his biggest and most important story arcs. Start with the trade titled Green Lantern Kyle Rayner Volume 1, and then look for the storylines Green Lantern The Power of Ion, followed by Green Lantern Brothers Keeper, and then The Omega Men, The End Is Here. I consider those to all be absolutely vital to Kyle's development as a character. You will absolutely have questions and be confused, since some of those stories are decades apart, but there's really no way to avoid that unless you just read everything, so hit the high points and ask any follow-up questions you need to. And that's it. Once again, all questions have been answered. If there's something you'd like to ask, leave it in the comment sections below this video, and I'll answer it when we eventually do a 4th one of these. And to make sure you see the video when it comes out, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and also follow me on Twitter at Mosaic Comics so you can avoid missing out. Everyone, I really appreciate your participation. This is a video series that literally could not happen without all of you. Both the people who write in with questions and the people who just watch the finished video. Both groups help to make this successful, and I really am grateful for that. So until next time, when I'll be tackling another batch of your questions, let me just say thank you for taking the time to watch. My name is Dan. We'll talk again soon.